Welcome back, everybody. We have a lovely house guest here for our holiday party series of episodes. Heather is joining us, Jim and I, here today. Heather, hello. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Good, very good. Well, it's the holidays. You can't go away without meeting other new friends and old friends and still get to hang out. So it's great that we can be joined by more people here today. We were chatting a little bit before we got started about um, the way that teams come together, the way that organizations have people interacting, the kind of psychology and the politics of that. And there was a topic that came to mind that I think I'd like to discuss, and that's about positive intent. Right? This whole concept that you want to believe people are doing the best thing that they can. Like, obviously they had a good reason for doing it. Well, I'd say they probably at least had a reason. And before I place my own filter on it, maybe we should assume positive intent. Probably they wanted to do the right thing. And maybe I'm just not in the right here. As much as I want to say that, I'm not sure. I don't know what you all think about that, Jim and Heather. Who wants to kick it off?
I will throw my opinion out there, and with the asterisk all the time of I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I feel that assume positive intent has oxymoronically the best of intentions, and I will assume positive intent when I hear the phrase assume positive intent. How I often see it used inside of teams, people, organizations, whatever, is as a way to create something better, as a way to begin to continuously improve, as a way to create more trust, more respect, more psychological safety, etc. And I think it can, but I think those things have to exist on some sort of foundation before we can start bandying the phrase assume positive intent about, because then it just feels weaponized. It feels like just assume the best of everybody. And a lot of us feel like that's very synonymous with naivete or blind trust or blind faith. And those things are all very scary. But maybe I'm cynical. Well, no, not maybe. You both know me well enough to know I am cynical. So, Heather, what are your thoughts on this phrase?
So I find the phrase assume positive intent to be a little bit triggering. And the reason for that is that the context that I'm hearing it in increasingly is one where there is a conflict or there is some kind of friction. And rather than sort of digging into the details of what is this conflict coming from, are there structural reasons for this conflict? Is it an issue of like a mix up of expectations, or is there something else going on? Instead, we want to, the people who are using this phrase want to sort of push it aside, avoid dealing with the conflict, and just say, well, just you should assume positive intent. You should just be nicer to each other. And I think that there is an underlying assumption there that the cause of this conflict is just that people are not assuming positive intent, that they're assuming ill will on the part of the other person. But in my experience, if I do assume that most people have positive intent, which I think is usually a pretty safe assumption, the reason that conflicts occur can be a huge amount of things that are challenges that we can address if we actually get into the details of them and don't just sort of like dismiss the emotional response.
The assuming negative intent is another weird one. I think there are people who just go into every situation assuming that you've got nothing but the worst plan for me. And hopefully that's not true either. Where do we make that connection with people? And what does it take to get there? Like, because if there's conflict, as you were just mentioning, I kind of feel like the conflict was probably there, regardless of the intention.
When I encounter conflict, I notice that a lot of times, because it presents a difficult conversation, people become emotional or they don't want to deal with the idea that there is the other person has maybe a different way of viewing the world than they do. They will try to avoid it. try to avoid the discussion. My experience of conflict is that you have to go through it to get to the other side, and that it's actually quite valuable to go through it and get to the other side, because if you do that, I really think that's how teams grow and how they build a stronger relationship. They learn to have those discussions, they learn to navigate those disagreements, and then they come up with new ideas as a result of it. I'm a really big believer in deliberation, and I read recently an article that phrased it as difference of opinion is one of the most valuable raw materials of collaborative work. And I believe that so strongly. And so if I just say, assume positive intent, I'm leaving so much on the table. We have an opportunity here to understand each other better, to dig into the details of maybe you have a brand new perspective on an idea that I never even thought of, or maybe you've noticed a bias that I'm not aware of. You got to get into it. And it's not easy, but if it was easy, anybody could do it.
What you just said there tells me that I said friends, earlier, and now I know it, right? That whole, like, how do we learn more about what's going on here so that we can grow from that? You're speaking my words of love right now.
I've said many times on here, and probably to both of you separately, that in the last few years, I've kind of taken a step away from the soft, squishy stuff. And it's not because I don't value it. It's just because ultimately I need to get things done, the right things. And I need to know enough about people, but I also know my own limitations. I know I'm not a psychologist. I know I'm not a doctor. I know I'm not a behavioral scientist. There is value in knowing a lot about these things and the origin of them and related ideas and all this. I do want, before we end in a few minutes, to see if there's any suggestions that we might have for everybody. But I want to connect a couple dots to this. One is actually, I'll first by showing my own inadequacy. This morning, I suffered from a lack of assuming positive intent. I asked somebody, "Can you make some time for me today? It's important. Here's what I need to talk about. I just need 15 minutes." Blah blah blah. Well, a couple hours go by, didn't hear anything, and I thought, and what did my brain start to say? Do you want to get? Actually, why don't you guess? What was my brain telling me?
They just don't care.
Yep.
Maybe they're busy.
Right? That's already more positive than what Heather said. But my thing was, this isn't important. I'm not important. They're disconnected, right? Like I was telling myself all these stories. And I struggle with this all the time in many aspects of life. And there's something I've learned and gotten help with and still get help with on like positive reframing, what's called positive reframing. And it may not be the same as assume positive intent. It may be explaining to yourself that there could be a very good explanation for this. There could be a positive explanation for this, et cetera. And it kind of jumps to not assuming. And then NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming, has this aspect of principle of positive intention, which is that all behavior serves a positive purpose, even aggressive behaviors, even negativity, even conflict, even whatever. And I think that's related. And then the one I want to leave you with, and then I want to hear what you all think about some of these things like positive reframing and all that, is Hanlon's razor, which is a tech idea, very analogous to assume positive intent, which is never attribute to malice what is also explainable by stupidity. I've also seen that. I've seen that just this week with some folks that I'm helping here in the US. Nobody was doing anything maliciously. It was just human error. It wasn't really stupidity. It was just human error. There's no bigger picture. So what do you think of these related ideas?
I don't want to steal Heather's thunder on the topic you brought up before. I don't know what's going on in somebody's head, right? So I'd rather not assume anything. I'd rather inquire more if I can, right? And so just that kind of framing to me helps me get away from they wanted to do well, but they screwed up. So is it any better? No, things are still in a messy state. Or they had a really evil mindset going into this, right? I don't know what they were thinking. All I know is that they chose their actions, maybe somewhat unconsciously, but they had their reasons for their actions, and they decided to do something. And now I have to figure out where are we now? Where do we go with that now? So that comes a bit to my mind. And it kind of also, as you were mentioning, these different theorems and whatnot, retrospective prime directive also came to mind. It's another great place that I've heard assume positive intent is when we're having a retrospective, and that whole bit from Norm Kurth of, well, if everyone was doing the best that they could, given what they knew at the time, etc., how could they not have had positive intent? And maybe they were. Doesn't mean we shouldn't dig into it and figure out what did we learn from that and where do we want to go. And the more that we do that with people, that we actually build that sense of curiosity, perhaps into our culture, helps us avoid either just assuming that everything was good from the beginning or that it was negative.
I mean, I very much agree with what you said, Rich, about that there's this uncertainty. You don't know what it is. So your mind will often tend to reach for a negative explanation. There is also, for myself, because I do the same thing, Jim, where I think, well, like, why don't they respect me? Those kind of things. I notice those things in other situations, like, hey, I then had coffee and I didn't think that anymore. After I had coffee, I felt a lot more charitable towards the person. And when I find myself in those headspaces, I think, well, it is a little bit narcissistic to think that everybody's actions are deliberately targeted at me and that they're thinking about me when they're doing this. And probably everybody is really mostly concerned with themselves. And I think, to build on what you said about Hanlon's razor, I always think when I see people spreading like conspiracy theories that most of the time it's just incompetence. There's not like a grand master, plan behind everything. There are people in the world who are toxic and manipulative and Machiavellian and really have ill intentions, but there are very few of those people. I've worked with those people. I know that they exist, but it's a tiny percentage of the population. When you are entering a discussion, and there's topics that are a little bit fraught, or there's something that you're sensitive about, it is important to have that sort of unconscious prompt to just reach everything or greet everything with curiosity. I remember working with an executive once, and it was a company that was in quite a lot of turmoil. They were doing a lot of changes. There were recent layoffs. It was a lot of stuff that was going on. There was a company survey that went out, and in the survey, some of the responses were just very sarcastic and very kind of like bitter in tone. And I remember the executive I was working with, their response was like, I can't believe these people aren't taking this seriously. And they took it very personally. They took it as a personal insult. And what I always tell people in these situations is, if you can step outside of yourself and realize that as a leader, it's not that people are meaning something personally against you. You're a symbol of the company. You're a symbol of the system that they feel some type of way about. And you can just assess these sort of responses as information rather than as something that's against you. So I see these surveys, people are angry to the point of being sarcastic and dismissive. Wow, there's something going on in my workforce. I need to figure out what's behind this, because this isn't going to be good for our ability to deliver value, be productive, have happy employees, any of these things. But if I get stuck in my headspace of like, I can't believe they said that to me, then I just get stuck there and I can't move out of it.
So as we wrap this section up, right, I think understanding who you're engaging with, what kind of are their expectations, or is an interesting piece to be mindful of. And it still doesn't excuse you from just reacting to something in a way that had nothing to do with what this person was trying to achieve. Right. So when your friends show up this holiday with a fruitcake in hand, don't just suddenly assume that they hate you and they want your life to be miserable with the fruitcake. Maybe they thought you loved fruitcake. Maybe they love it too and they just want to eat it. Maybe they thought this is going to be a cooking competition and we're going to see how we can repurpose this thing in the next 20 minutes. I don't know, but just take it there and be like, cool, we're still friends, right? We can get past all this. Enjoy your holidays, learning about what that intent actually was. Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Visotcky. Join Jim Sammons and I for our 12 days of holiday-themed conversations. Subscribe now and tune back in for tomorrow's episode.